If you feel like everything costs more than your paycheck can handle, you're not imagining it. The American affordability crisis is real, deep, and structural, not just a series of temporary price spikes. For decades, costs for essential goods and services have risen faster than incomes for most households, leaving many Americans stretched thin, even when they earn what used to be considered a comfortable wage. Understanding how we got here means looking at policy, markets, wages, and the cost of everyday life, and how all of these forces combined have made basic living increasingly unaffordable for millions. At its heart, the affordability crisis is about a growing gap between the cost of living and what people earn. According to research from the Urban Institute, more than half of American families don't have enough resources to cover what it actually costs to live securely in their communities. In practical terms, that means housing, food, healthcare, childcare, and transportation necessities that used to be affordable for the middle class now consume a much larger share of household budgets. This isn't just anecdotal. When prices for essentials increase faster than wages, the purchasing power of the average household erodes. Even if nominal wages, the number on your paycheck, go up, what matters is real purchasing power, what that money can actually buy. In many sectors, wage growth has simply not kept pace with rising costs. One of the most visible and devastating components of the crisis is housing. Over the past decade, home prices and rents have soared in much of the United States, while the supply of affordable housing has lagged behind demand. In many major markets, homeownership costs now consume nearly or even more than 100% of typical wages, especially in places like California and New York. For renters, the situation is equally dire. Nearly half of renters aged 35 to 44, a prime working age group, spend at least 30% of their income on housing, a level that economists define as cost-burdened. About 23% of renters in that age group spend half or more of their income on rent and utilities. When housing takes such a large share of income, it squeezes every other part of life: food, healthcare, transportation, savings, education, and even retirement planning. It also delays or prevents people from achieving long-held goals like homeownership or starting a family, making housing affordability a central driver of the broader crisis. A common misconception is that the affordability crisis is simply about prices going up. But in many cases, wages have not risen fast enough to match the cost of essential services. Research shows that the U.S. economy has undergone structural changes that weakened broad-based wage growth over decades. One key factor was the decline of manufacturing jobs, once a backbone of middle-class wages, and the rise of a service-oriented economy where wage gains have been concentrated in a narrow set of high-productivity sectors. This shift means that while some high-earning professionals have seen real income growth, many workers in sectors like healthcare, education, retail, and hospitality have seen slower wage growth, even as the costs of those very services rise. That mismatch, rising costs for services and stagnant wages for many workers, lies at the core of the affordability problem. Housing is the most visible cost pressure, but it's far from the only one. Healthcare, childcare, and food have all become significantly more expensive over time, often without corresponding increases in income or support. For example, recent reporting shows that rising healthcare costs are forcing many Americans to make difficult financial trade-offs, such as skipping meals or delaying care just to afford premiums and out-of-pocket expenses. This strain affects both insured and uninsured individuals, with many delaying necessary medical care because of cost. Childcare costs have also ballooned in many regions, sometimes rivaling the cost of college tuition and forcing families to choose between work and affordable care. Food prices have remained elevated even as overall inflation has eased, meaning everyday grocery bills take up a larger share of household income than in the past. When essential services all rise together, families feel the squeeze everywhere, and there's little room left for discretionary spending or saving. A key insight from research is that the affordability crisis is not limited to low-income households. Even many middle-class families struggle to afford basic necessities where they live. A Brookings Institution analysis found that 1/3 of middle-class households cannot afford essential costs like food, housing, and childcare in their metro areas. That's true even in cities that are not traditionally seen as expensive. This means that middle class, as a label, no longer guarantees financial security. A family earning what would once have been considered a comfortable income can still struggle to make ends meet, especially in high-cost urban areas. That's why so many people with seemingly decent salaries still feel like they're just getting by. The affordability crisis didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen by accident. A range of policy decisions over decades have shaped the economic landscape we live in today. on housing, zoning restrictions, slow permitting processes, and regulatory barriers have limited the supply of new homes and affordable units in many cities. When supply is constrained and demand is high, prices naturally rise, and that's exactly what has happened in many parts of the country. On wages and labor markets, policies that once supported collective bargaining and middle-class job growth have weakened over time, contributing to wage polarization. At the same time, trade and industrial policies contributed to the hollowing out of manufacturing jobs that once provided stable, middle-wage employment. These structural policy decisions have long-term effects, and reversing them or even mitigating them is politically and economically complex. In response to the affordability crisis, politicians from both major parties have proposed a range of measures aimed at reducing everyday costs. Recent proposals have included rent and utility freezes, grocery price caps, suspensions of gas taxes, and limits on institutional investors in the housing market. However, many economists caution that such measures can have unintended consequences like reducing supply or creating market distortions if not paired with broader structural reforms. For example, simply capping prices without addressing the underlying lack of housing supply can lead to shortages and reduced investment in new construction. The consensus among many experts is that sustainable solutions require boosting real incomes and expanding supply, whether in housing, healthcare, or childcare, rather than temporary price controls. The affordability crisis isn't just about numbers, it's about how people feel and experience their lives. When a family spends most of its income on essentials, there's little left for emergencies, savings, or future planning. That creates chronic financial stress and anxiety. Reddit discussions reflect this lived reality, with many Americans describing the struggle to afford basic costs even while working hard or earning decent salaries. Users note that the cultural expectation of success owning a home, having financial security clashes with the economic reality of rising costs and limited mobility. This emotional aspect of the crisis, the feeling of being stuck, unable to get ahead, is a defining feature of the current economic moment. The affordability crisis also intersects with long-standing inequalities. Research shows that racial and ethnic disparities exist in who can afford basic necessities, with Black, Hispanic, and Native American families often facing higher rates of financial strain compared to white families. These disparities reflect deeper patterns of inequality in income, wealth, access to credit, and opportunities for upward mobility. Affordability isn't just a universal problem, it's a differentiated one, with some groups facing steeper barriers and fewer safety nets. So how did Americans get stuck in the affordability crisis? The answer isn't a single cause, it's a combination of rising costs, stagnant or uneven wage growth, policy choices that constrain supply, and a social structure that hasn't kept pace with economic realities. The crisis is both structural and personal. Structural in how markets, wages, and policy have evolved, personal in how families experience the strain of everyday life. Moving forward, addressing affordability will require more than short-term fixes. It will demand broad reforms that boost real incomes, expand affordable housing supply, reduce the cost of essential services, and confront inequality directly. These are not simple tasks, but understanding the root causes is the first step toward real solutions. If this opened your eyes to the real forces shaping your money and your life, subscribe now, because we go beyond tips and tactics to reveal the hidden systems, behaviors, and economic truths most people never talk about.